It is not the scout who wins the battle, but the people, the army. But the scout, as experience shows, is not the last, but the first fighter in the chain of fighting advancing far ahead of the attacking rampart. He, the scout, helps not order. He helps above all a quick and deep mind, the ability to instantly comprehend completely unexpected information, to penetrate into the enemy's plan, to anticipate his steps, wrote Marshal of the Soviet Union Vasilevsky. Lieutenant Colonel Nikolai Alexeyevich Kuznetsov was awarded the Order of Suvorov, a degree for his initiative in the use of intelligence data, masterful, confident command of the regiment's units in the night battle with the forcing of 2 water obstacles on the move, taking possession of the enemy stronghold with the fewest losses. The same award was given to the battalion commander Major Stepan Trofimovich Orlov. Orders and medals were also awarded to a large group of regimental scouts, including scouts of a separate reconnaissance company of the 175th Rifle Division. Sergeant M. Povnov and Private Kitev, who were most distinguished in the reconnaissance near Blistorf, were awarded the Order of Glory, II degree. The second half of the day of April 18, 1945, was remembered to me one more bright display of courage and combat daring of our fighters. Comrade General, me Colonel Vladimir Denisovich Morozov, commander of the 207th Cannon Artillery Regiment of the 10th Cannon Brigade of the 6th Artillery Division of the RGK, who arrived at the observation post of the corps, addressed me. The situation is complicated. The rifle units and assault groups have penetrated into the enemy's defense between his strongholds and stone buildings. They are subjected to intense fire and continuous counterattacks. In such a situation, the fire of my cannoneers from closed positions is of little use. Let me repeat the maneuver of our fathers, artillerymen of the Civil War. Not maneuver. I didn't understand at once. My father told me that at the most intense moment of the battle, the Red artillerymen galloped into open firing positions and shot the enemy at point-blank range. Now we have all the targets scouted, we can risk it. The thing you say, Colonel, I could not refrain from praise. Go ahead, God of War. What I soon saw on the southeastern outskirts of Forstadt and Mekshavad exceeded all expectations. Under the cover of the houses, calculations rolled 152 guns into open firing positions and aptly struck at the enemy. The blow of our guns, by direct fire, stunned the Hitlerites. They trembled and ran under the onslaught of the attacked units. Involuntarily thought, history is inclined to repetitions. After all, it was a few south of these places 186 years ago, in the Battle of Kuniersdorf in 1759, Russian infantry and artillery won a brilliant victory over the Prussians. All participants of the battle were given medals with the words embossed on them, to the victor over the Prussians. Many soldiers and commanders who distinguished themselves at the capture of Forstadt earned high honors of the motherland, and the son of a Civil War artilleryman, the commander of the 207th Cannon Artillery Regiment of the Order of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, Colonel Vladimir Denisovich Morozov, became a hero of the Soviet Union. In April 19, troops of the 47th Army, having pulled up artillery, were preparing to go on the offensive by noon in order to break through the third line of enemy defenses. On the eve of the offensive, I visited the 175th Infantry Division. At the command post, Colonel Weidrigan, shining freshly shaved head, tired and pale from sleepless nights, happily twirled his long mustache. At his command post were the commander and deputy commander of the 334th Guards Heavy Self-Propelled Regiment from the reserve of the Supreme High Command. We arrived on time, comrades, Weidrigan said cheerfully. Lieutenant Colonels F.V. Garashchenko and P. Trofimov he knew for a long time. Back in the summer and fall of 1944, Guards artillerymen fought for a long time in the division near Warsaw. Since that time, a lot had changed. There was no longer in the division cheerful, energetic Chief of Staff Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Vasilievich Soloviev. He now commanded a neighboring division. The commander of one of the advanced regiments, Colonel A. Z. Verin, became Weidrigan's deputy. Shy, skinny, small stature, the head of Intelligence Division, Captain Igor Gazakevich, who on behalf of the commander often communicated with the artillerymen, transferred to the army headquarters. Hardly anyone imagined at the time that this outwardly modest and small-talking scout after the war to become a major Soviet writer. Many of the heroes of his works, living people, soldiers of the 175th Infantry Division. The conversation did not last long. The commander was interested in the availability of ammunition, fuel. He knew that the guards had recently received new vehicles behind the Oder, armed with 122mm guns, with long barrels, capable of penetrating the armor of any enemy tank, including the Tiger. Heavy tankers are kind people. With their equipment to fight, the devil himself is not afraid, said the colonel. The self-propelled artillery units were mounted on the chassis of KB heavy tanks and looked like a tank in every respect, except that their turrets did not turn like a tank. That's why Vidrigan invariably referred to the self-propelled gunners as heavy tankers. "Now, comrades, said the division commander. We have very little time at our disposal. At 12:00 we will begin the attack." He leaned over the map and circled the red pencil mark of the railroad station. According to intelligence, here buried enemy tanks and many guns, particularly dangerous anti-aircraft batteries. They are used by the Germans against tanks. The battle began at noon. Our heavy artillery and bombers from the air for a long time processed the front edge of the enemy, who was still trying to hold on, having a favorable position. It was especially difficult to approach the enemy infantry. The attack was choked under the strongest rifle and machine gun and artillery and mortar fire. But here ours found a weakness of the enemy. On the right in the swampy bushes appeared self-propelled guns of Lieutenant Alexander Mezentsev. The infantry was following them. Now when you look at the headquarters map, it is clear why Marshal of the Soviet Union G.K. Zhukov gave a new order to the troops. The fact is that the greatest success on April 16 and 17 was achieved on the right flank of the strike group of the front in the offensive zone of the 47th and 3rd Shock Armies. The commander of the 1st Belarusian Front on April 18 changed the direction of their strikes. He ordered the 3rd and 5th Shock Armies and the 2nd Guards Tank Army to reach the northeastern outskirts of Berlin faster, and our 47th Army and the 9th Guards Tank Corps to strike in the direction of Gazelberg, Bayersdorf, Bernau-Schildow, Hermsdorf to start covering Berlin from the north and northwest. From the morning of April 18, 1945, in the area of Batzlav, in the strip of the 3rd Shock Army in the battle, was introduced 9th Guards Tank Corps Guards Major General of Tank Forces N.D. Vedenev, which was to be engaged in the battle. Vedenev, which, advancing in the direction of Batzlav, Hertzhorn, Sternbeck, Leuenberg, Schoenfeld, part of the forces passed in the strip of the neighbour on the left, 129th Rifle Corps of our 47th Army, and in cooperation with his units at 17.0 on April 19 broke through the 3rd strip of enemy defences in the area of Sternbeck. Using the success of the tankers, compounds of the 129th Infantry Corps by the end of April 19 approached the Markgraf Lake, cut into the enemy defence for more than 5 kilometres, continuing the offensive to the west. Using the success of the neighbour on the left, on the night of April 20, the 125th Infantry Corps made a manoeuvre march by parts of the 76th and 60th Infantry Divisions with the bypass of Lake Grossesee from the south, came to the flank and rear of the enemy on the boundaries of his 3rd line of defence. Hitlerites, fearing encirclement, began to roll back in the northwestern and western directions, trying to break away from our troops and timely occupy the next prepared lines in the Berlin direction. In the 175th and 76th Infantry Divisions, operating in the first echelon of the corps, the pursuit of the retreating enemy was entrusted to reinforced forward detachments of infantry regiments. The infantrymen were put on vehicles and armour of the 1,892nd Self-Propelled and 334th Guards Heavy Self-Propelled Regiments. They were followed by the main force of the divisions, rolled up in columns. The self-propelled first to break into Bernau. After a while, I reported to the army commander. The city is taken by the troops of the 125th Rifle Corps. I'm moving here my forward command post. Being behind the Oder was coming more and more powerfully into its own. The sun shone through the smoke of the fires. But what the cosy suburbs of Berlin, built up with summer houses, mansions, palaces of the German Rich, and said the war left traces everywhere. Anti-tank piles, gaping craters, ruins of houses destroyed by bombing. In the basements, adapted as firing points, tons of ammunition, shells, packed shell boxes, machine guns, cannons, and everywhere the corpses of German soldiers. Fascists are fiercely defending. They cling to every settlement, every house. Still solid defences of the enemy is the terrain, abounding in a large number of rivers, artificial channels, which during the spring floods are natural impassable obstacles. But the enemy's lair is quite close. Passing through Brno, I saw at the crossroads of a wide highway a shriveled road sign with large German letters. Berlin. Lieutenant Sasha Solovyev, the commissar of the 334th Guards Heavy Self-Propelled Artillery Regiment, was busy nailing a pre-prepared piece of plywood on this post, on which was written in Russian, "On forward, comrades, to Berlin." The self-propelled gunners acted well. The head of the political department of the Corps told me about the feat of the commander of the 1,822nd Self-Propelled Artillery Regiment of the Red Banner, Major Leonid Semenovich Daniluk. On the southern outskirts of Brno, the units he commanded met fierce resistance from enemy anti-tank artillery and Fosniki. Being in the lead self-propelled unit, Major Daniluk took all enemy fire on himself. The self-propelled vehicle received a through hole. But despite this, the regiment commander, suppressing the Hitlerites' fire points, continued to entice his subordinates. It's about the unparalleled bravery of the major went legends. His exploits told about his combat awards. 3 orders of the Red Banner, the Order of Patriotic War to a degree. The Order of Lenin and the Gold Star of the Hero of the Soviet Union were added to them for the capture of Brno. The infantrymen were not lagging behind the artillerymen in valor, and they covered them with fire. In the battles for Brno in the 277th Rifle Regiment, the commanders of 3 rifle companies were wounded. The commander of the machine gun company, Senior Lieutenant Kudrat Safan, united the units under. By skillful tactical maneuver, he led them to the rear of the enemy and competently managed the battle, as a result of which up to 50 Hitlerites were destroyed, 5 firing points were suppressed, 5 self-propelled guns abandoned in panic were captured. Senior Lieutenant Kudrat Safan. For this battle, later I awarded the Order of the Red Banner. What wonderful command cadres were brought up by the Communist Party during the great patriotic, selfless love for the motherland aroused in peaceful Soviet people anger and hatred for the Nazi invaders, forced them to acquire professional military qualities to beat the hated enemy skillfully and mercilessly. It always pleased me that in the friendly family of commanders and political workers at the front, one could always meet representatives of many nationalities of our motherland. And now I told about the Belarusian, Regiment Commander L. Daniluk Qatar, Company Commander K. Safan. I would like to tell about the amazing fate of Uzbek Kerim Muradov, a teacher of national language and literature. At the last lesson, saying goodbye to the children before leaving for the front, Kerim. Our national heroes fought well to make us free and happy. Now we are free and our life is joyful. In order not to have our joy taken away from us by our enemies, we should fight 10 times better. When Muradov was saying goodbye to his father, old Murad said to him, "My son Kerim, your father was a laborer, bent his back on the rich and did not have enough bread and meat. Soviet power has made us prosperous and our life happy. Go kill the enemy. Let the enemy die and our happiness live." And after some time, Junior Sergeant Kerim Muradov was already at the front and mercilessly crushed the enemy. It is possible to write a big book about how Kerim Muradov fought, how he grew from a junior sergeant to a captain, a holder of 6 battle orders. The day of April 20, 1945 remained in my memory marked not only by the capture of Brno, an important stronghold on the way to Berlin, but also by other pleasant events. In the morning on the height of 94.2 southwest of Bayersdorf, where at the forward command post I clarified the task of the corps compounds, the commander of the 30th Guards Cannon Artillery Prague Red Banner, Order of Kutuzov and Bogdan Kamenetsky Brigade, Guards Colonel Joseph Semyonovich Shigarev, drove up in a Willys. "Samraj General," he said, "the 1st Division of the 30th Guards Brigade under the command of Guards Major Zhukin is ready to give the first salvo on Berlin. So why stop, dear Joseph Semyonovich? Start beating the enemy in his lair. I congratulate you and all artillerymen on this historic event." That's the point, that it is historic. The Guards Colonel smiled broadly. The artillery commander of the front, Colonel General Kazakov, requires confirmation of the General Army Chief from the area of firing positions and the time of the fire raid on Berlin. They have everything exactly calibrated, confirmed the nearby commander of the Artillery Corps, Colonel Ayamikev. We can call the artillery commander of the front. I ordered the radio operator. Colonel General of Artillery Kazakov immediately responded. "Vasily Ivanovich." "Hello," I said. I am pleased to confirm the coordinates of firing positions of the Division of Guards Major Zhukin, which are in the combat order of the 125th Rifle Corps. Your subordinates are ready to open fire on Berlin. I pass the phone to Guards Colonel Zhigarev. At 8 o'clock on April 20, 1945, the Division of Guards Major A. Zhukin gave the first artillery salvo on Berlin. At 40, the 2nd Division of the 207th Cannon Artillery Regiment of the 10th Cannon Artillery Brigade of the 6th Breakthrough Artillery Division opened fire on the last citadel of Hitlerites. Batteries wrote new lines in the heroic history of Soviet artillery. I remember that at noon on April 20, on the outskirts of Brno, which had just been cleared of Hitlerites, I met with a group of correspondents of central newspapers, among whom was a representative of Red Star Lieutenant Colonel Pavel Troyanovsky. The first thing he asked where the Artillery Division of Guards Major Zhukin was. "You are late, comrade correspondents, you are late," I said then. "After all, today we gave the first salvo on Berlin, but I think the artillerymen from the 30th Guards Cannon Artillery Brigade are not far behind catch up." During the 5th day of the offensive, the compounds of the 125th Infantry Corps, with battles advanced 25 kilometers, and in cooperation with the 9th Guards Tank Corps and other compounds, created conditions for the successful capture of Berlin from the north. Returning to the Corps headquarters in the evening, I signed with satisfaction the combat order to the Corps compounds prepared by the Chief of Staff. During the night of April 21, 1945, advancing westward in the direction of Schenelin-die-Schildow-Franau to complete the coverage of Berlin from the north, with access to the area of Genningsdorf, with a move to force the Hohenzollern Canal, creating conditions for maneuver in the southwestern direction. In cooperation with the units of the 9th Guards Tank Corps to continue the offensive day and night, and not to give the enemy the opportunity to organize the defense on the new lines. To this end, the combat order of the division to echelon, in front to have mobile, reinforced forward detachments, on the flanks and in the rear of the enemy in cooperation with the 9th Guards Tank Corps, to throw out a reinforced tank landing force with the task of disorganizing the rear, and control of the enemy and forcing the Hohenzollern Canal from the rear. I thought that was all for today. We could rest for a couple of hours. It was a hard day. But the direct telephone with the commander was ringing on the table. "Andrei Matveyevich," came the voice of Franz Iosifovich Pehorovich, "we have some pleasant news for you. The Military Council of the 47th Army cordially congratulates you on the awarding of the rank of Lieutenant General. The rank of General has also been conferred on the commander of the 175th Infantry, Zakhar Petrovich Vidrigan." It was not a bad day. April 20, 1945, a bright event in the combat affairs of the 125th Rifle Corps was the next day's raid of the 282nd Rifle Regiment of the 175th Rifle Division, which acted as a troop on the armour of the 65th Guards Tank Brigade of the 9th Guards Tank Corps. It took place with the support of self-propelled artillery units. United in a powerful fist, all these units were solving one task. The sun had not yet risen. The morning fog was settling on the broken, mangled earth and burnt greenery. Dewdrops fluttered in its foliage. Birds chirped in the gardens. The morning chill refreshed the people. It was as if yesterday's bloody day had never happened. But our people were alert. They knew that this was the calm before the storm, and the day would start just like yesterday. The fighting would break out with even greater vigor and continue until the enemy was finally defeated. Suddenly, like a thunderbolt, an enemy artillery shell exploded, followed by another, a third. The enemy did not spare shells. In a few minutes, the soft colours of the lovely April morning sank in the acrid cinders, in the black dust cloud. The battle began. After the artillery preparation, the enemy tanks went into counterattack. Lieutenant Arkady Shaimarin, the commander of the self-propelled gun, was watching the enemy's approach in the triplex. At the right moment, he gives the commands fire. The 122 cannon sounded powerfully. The second, third shot. The enemy tank was covered with a thick cloud of smoke. Did it hit? The flames flared up, and when they dissipated, everyone saw a blackened pile of metal in place of the tank. The voice of the regiment commander broke through the rumble of battle in the headphones of helmet phone. "Well done, Comrade Shimorin. I declare my gratitude to your crew." In this battle, Lieutenant Shimorin's self-propelled gun also destroyed an assault gun. Arkady Shimorin was known to the guards of the regiment as one of the best combat officers. In the past, before serving in the army, he was a teacher. He started to fight in 1941 on the western border as a squad commander. He participated in heavy defensive battles. Twice wounded. At the front, he became an officer. For his military exploits, he was awarded many orders and medals. Looking ahead, I will say that after the war, Arkady Dmitrovich again returned to peaceful labor. He worked in the village Sirisyak, Poretsky district, as a director of an 8-year school. Sideshalther self-propelled vehicles entered the battle. The enemy again goes in a counterattack. Again it is repulsed by our heroes. Powerful guns of self-propelled units hit the enemy with direct fire. Rifle units on the shoulders of the retreating enemy in disarray burst into the suburbs of Frano. And it happens so quickly that the Nazis not only do not have time to take out equipment and weapons, but themselves fall into captivity. From the semi-basement of a multi-story building, with their heads bowed and hands raised, they come out one by one. Among the captives there are quite boys, about 14-15 years old. Their tunics, sewn for adults, long sleeves, wide collar and a helmet that does not fit their heads, hang baggy on their shoulders. Who are they? Schoolboys sheltering in the basement. No, they are Jungsturmopsi, the fruits of Hitler's total mobilization. Our soldiers looked at them That's what they've come to. They don't even spare their children. In the head detachment of the tank landing the Komsorg of the battalion of the 282nd Rifle Regiment, candidate member of the All-Union Communist Party of the People's Commissar Sergeant Nikolai Denisov acted perfectly. Before the battle in Frano, he arranged all Komsomol members on tanks, having set them the task to help the commander of the unit in the organization of the battle to show an example in discipline and in the accuracy of execution of orders. In the enemy location, Denisov was the first to jump off the tank. In the ensuing hand-to-hand combat, he acted boldly and bravely. He personally destroyed 3 Hitlerites. West of Brno, the enemy stubbornly defended the fortified Point Glinicky. The battalion commander, Senior Lieutenant Stepan Onoprienko, having quickly formed 2 groups of machine gunners, sappers, anti-tank rifles, bypassed the barricades built by Hitlerites from the flanks, struck from the rear, destroyed their defenders and took the stronghold without losses. In the battle for Frano, at the approach to the Hohenzollern Canal, the enemy tried to cut off the head camping outpost from the main forces by large forces of infantry and tanks. Senior Lieutenant Onoprienko made a maneuver, quickly deployed the main forces of the battalion and struck the enemy from the flank. Destroyed 50 Hitlerites and took 40 prisoners. The battalion commander was awarded the Order of the Red Banner for his courage and combat skill. In this battle, Onoprienko was supported by the artillery battery of Senior Lieutenant Peter Dmitriev. Rolling out their guns under enemy fire, the battery suppressed 8 enemy fire points, thus clearing the way for the infantry. During the battle, Dmitriev was seriously wounded, but continued to direct the fire of the battery. We awarded him the Order of Bogdan Kamenetsky of the 111th degree after the victory. In the we can tell a lot about the interaction of artillery with infantry during the Berlin operation. Artillerymen not only beat the enemy perfectly, but also supported and accompanied the infantry in time. During the raid of the advanced detachment of the 175th Rifle Division, Zakhar Petrovich Vidrigan called me to the NP and told me such a case. At the turn of a suburban highway, artillerymen, self-propelled gunners and paratroopers met a German passenger car. The commander's self-propelled car also stopped. A German general accompanied by an officer and a soldier got out of the car, raised their hands in horror. It turned out that the Nazis got lost, returning from the rear to the front line. The general stood with his head down, suppressing fear and confusion. He tried to say something, but our commander, looking at him unkindly, ordered 2 machine gunners to escort the Hitlerites to the division headquarters. He himself jumped into the self-propelled vehicle and gave the command. Turn on the engines, keep the distance, and the German general and his escort under the guard of our machine gunners wandered dejectedly to the east. So, on April 19, our troops broke through the 3rd strip of defense of Berlin. By the end of April 21, the 3rd and 5th Shock Armies, as well as the 2nd Guards Tank Army, reached the northeastern outskirts of the German capital. The 9th Guards Tank Corps of the 2nd Guards Tank Army, together with units of our 47th Army, came to the River Havel, which is on the northwestern outskirts of the capital. Closely cooperating tankers and gunners began its forcing. Sections of the 1st Guards Tank and 8th Guards, Army also went to the outer defensive encirclement. By the end of the day on April 22, conditions were created to complete the encirclement and dissection of the entire Berlin group of the enemy. With what fury of the doomed fought Hitlerites, we can judge from the testimony of a captured Oberleutnant, a sailor, captured by our scouts on April 22 in the area of Blenkenfeld. He testified that a few days ago, he came to Berlin with the task of selecting an area for the accommodation of 1,500 sailors, who should arrive from the submarine base in Kiel for the defense of Berlin. The captured Oberleutnant also said that the Berlin Guard regiment was part of the capital's garrison. The regiment consists of 3 combat groups and a tank company. Each group has 3 companies, 2 rifle companies and 1 machine gun company, with 80-85 men in a company. In the tank company, 6 tanks and 10 self-propelled vehicles. On the first day of the battle west of Bernau, the regiment desperately resisted, but was defeated by the Russians, lost 70 of the personnel. Only 2 tanks and 4 self-propelled guns remained in the line. However, let's return to the offensive zone of our 125th Infantry Corps. Tank landing and advanced detachments of infantry divisions in the area of the corps breakthrough thoroughly disorganized the rear and control of the enemy troops. By 2 o'clock in the morning on April 22, 1945, they forced the Hohenzollern Channel and captured a bridgehead on its bank. The Corps headquarters was pleased with the message that they managed to save the railroad bridge, unsuccessfully blown up by Hitlerites in a hurry for crossing. Having thrown ropes, assault bridges between the blown-up spans, infantrymen and mortarmen successfully moved forward. A group of sappers consisting of Communist Senior Sergeant V. Moiseyev, Privates A. Kostelin and A. Bashagatov, clinging to the bridge deck, between the rails, Plastiki quickly moved towards the fire. The bullets and fragments from mines were whistling around. They had to extinguish the burning bridge with overcoats and trench coats. At that time, the group of capture, led by Sergeant G. Ivanov, rushed over the burning bridge to the opposite bank of the canal and began to cover the work of sappers on the bridge with fire from automatic rifles. Senior Lieutenant M. Kozhevnikov did not hesitate on the bridge, threw the whole company to the opposite bank, ordered to entrench. The company repulsed 2 counterattacks, having destroyed 15 Hitlerites and taken 10 prisoners. At that time, a group of sappers under the direction of the commander of the sapper company of the 95th Separate Sapper Battalion, Senior Lieutenant P.E. Okremenko, was already working on the bridge. The sappers demined the bridge. The fire was extinguished everywhere. He later served a good service for the artillery crossing. Captain Pavel Ivanovich Petrakov, commander of the 1st Rifle Battalion of the 277th Rifle Regiment, saved another crossing of the Hohenzollern Canal for our troops at the cost of his own life. I knew Petrakov well since the time of the battles on the Kursk Bulge. His battalion, which was usually in the first echelon of the division, repeatedly broke through the heavily fortified enemy defences. Forced Desna, Soch, Dieppe, Berezina, Stakehod, Western Bug, Vistula, Bzura. With battles, the battalion passed all Poland and Pomerania. Captain Petrakov's subordinates became real masters of close combat during the breakthrough of enemy defences, fighting in its depth, forcing water obstacles. They acted perfectly, and on the Oder, almost all of them received government awards. High awards of the motherland decorated the chest of the brave combatant. The Order of the Red Banner, the Patriotic War of AC and II degrees, the Red Star. On April 21, 1945, Captain Petrakov's battalion was advancing west of Bernau in the area of Molenbeek. The enemy resisted stubbornly, held a section of the railroad north of the platform Schildov-Bad Schnurwur. As always, and here showed the commanding skill of Captain Petrakov, the creative search and execution of such forms, techniques, maneuvers in close combat, with the help of which you can defeat the enemy, significantly superior in strength. The commander of the battalion was able to hold back the Hitlerites' actions from the front with machine guns, and on the left flank, using the success of the tank landing near Schildova, by a blow to the rear to defeat the enemy and seize a section of the railroad. Using the confusion of the enemy, the battalion on his shoulders broke through to the Hohenzollern Canal, seeking to seize the bridge near Jenningsdorf. Captain P.I. Petrakov took a bold step. He put on a self-propelled machine gun and, together with them at maximum speed, destroying Hitlerites running to the bridge with fire and tracks, broke into the highway bridge covered with fire. In this rapid battle with the enemy won the commander's skill, speed, courage, and heroism. The bridge, engulfed in fire, was captured by the men of the battalion. Scouts, sappers, infantrymen shooting down the fire that engulfed the bridge immediately began to repair it. Soon artillerymen began to successfully cross the bridge to the opposite bank of the canal, and Captain Petrikov's battalion was already chasing the Nazis farther and farther away. When I was reported that in this battle an enemy bullet killed a hero, a great master of close combat, Communist Pavel Ivanovich Petrukov, I could not come to my senses for a long time. The memory of the hero of the Soviet Union, Captain P.I. Petrukov, will forever remain in our hearts. Soldiers and commanders swore to avenge the Hitlerites for the death of their favorite commander, to act in battle, as he did, bravely and decisively, and they kept their word. Under strong machine gun fire of the enemy, the platoon of Komsomol Junior Lieutenant R. Andrianov, without losses, rushed through the highway bridge, captured on the other bank of the canal the equipped position of Germans. Holding the captured line, the soldiers repulsed 2 counterattacks of the enemy. The platoon commander personally killed 3 Hitlerites in hand-to-hand combat. The Order of Alexander Nevsky marked by Motherland the feat of a boy from the Vladimir region, Junior Lieutenant Arkady Andrianov, heir to the military glory of the master of close combat Pavel Ivanovich Petrukov. Captain Petrikov's success was skillfully used by the commander of the 282nd Rifle Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel N.S.S. Lazebnikov. His units, supported by the fire of tanks of the 65th Tank Brigade, crossed the canal on the captured bridge and seized the enemy trench on the opposite bank. The regiment's units had expanded the bridgehead by morning. By evening began the mass forcing of the Hohenzollern Canal by regiments of the 175th and 76th Infantry Divisions. On the captured bridges, on boats, ferries, improvised means, our soldiers rushed to the opposite bank, rapidly seized bridgeheads under the hurricane fire of the enemy, and there was no force in the world that could stop them on the way to Berlin. Barely having overcome one water obstacle, regimental commanders urgently sent forward scouts. With the onset of darkness, a group of scouts of the 93rd Rifle Regiment, led by the assistant platoon commander, petty officer Ivan Smyslov, went in. They were tasked to scout the approaches and places most convenient for crossing the Mergraben Canal in the enemy's rear, as well as to capture a prisoner. The reconnaissance group managed to secretly penetrate through the enemy's fighting order and reach the water barrier. Several boats were found on the shore. The scouts got into them and crossed to the opposite bank of the Mergraben Canal. On the defense of the bank of the canal, the fascists mobilized the fire guard of the airfield. At the first shots and grenade bursts, these soldiers scattered and hid. Using the data received from the prisoners, the scouts went further to the rear of the enemy. At the crossroads, they set up an ambush. Here they captured several more prisoners. So, having accomplished the task, the scouts returned to the regiment, and at dawn a new challenge awaited them. Taking advantage of darkness and fog, more than a company of Hitlerites infiltrated into the area of the observation point of the 93rd Rifle Regiment. The scouts, raised on the alert, entered the battle. Here again Petty Officer Smyslov distinguished himself. Taking a captured German machine gun, the petty officer went up to the 3rd floor of the building and began to shoot the Nazis. The Germans tried to suppress the firing point. Officer Smyslov was wounded. He ran out of ammunition. Blood was pouring into his eyes. Having hastily bandaged his wound, Smyslov took a German automatic rifle in his hands and opened fire on Hitlerites. Their attack scouts not only successfully repulsed, but also 20 fascists were taken prisoner. The enemy assumed that after his night attack a lull would follow, which could be used to strengthen their positions. But the headquarters of the 93rd Rifle Regiment thought otherwise. The reconnaissance group led by Petty Officer Smyslov delivered valuable information. They gave enough grounds for a daring counterattack. It was carried out by a rifle battalion under the command of Senior Lieutenant Karasev. Experienced master of close combat Senior Lieutenant Karasev, previously awarded the Order of Alexander Nevsky, Patriotic War I degree and the Red Star for his military distinctions, and this time made a mature command decision. Having strengthened the flanks of the battalion with machine guns and calculations of anti-tank guns, he led the soldiers in a rapid attack on the southwestern outskirts of Geringsdorf. Hitlerites, who decided to have a rest, jumped out of houses to their positions, but fell under the razing machine gun fire. Having destroyed up to a company of fascists, the battalion broke through to the airfield, scouted by Petty Officer Smyslov's group. Here our fighters were waiting for rich trophy. 12 airplanes, anti-aircraft guns, a lot of various technical equipment. At dawn, the battalion successfully crossed the Maghreben Canal and fully accomplished the combat task. Orders of the Red Banner, awarded to Petty Officer Ivan Semyonovich Smyslov and Senior Lieutenant Ivan Andreevich Karasev, worthily recognized the exploits of these true masters of close combat. As a result of the forcing of the Hohenzollern Canal near Henningsdorf and the capture of the bridgehead on the opposite bank by units of the 125th Rifle Corps in cooperation with the 33rd Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade of the 9th Guards Tank Corps, by the end of April 22, 1945, the right flank strike group of troops of the 1st Belarusian Front was able to develop a blow in a southern direction to Potsdam, in order to cover Berlin from the northwest to completely encircle the entire Berlin group of the enemy. With great joy and pride, the personnel of the 125th Rifle Corps met the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief from April 23, 1945, with the announcement of gratitude to the troops who broke through the heavily fortified, deeply echeloned German defense, covering Berlin from the east and advanced from 60 to 100 kilometers. The order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, with congratulations for the successful fighting on the left bank of the Oder, the appeal of the Military Council of the Front about the storming of Berlin caused a great political upsurge and high offensive impulse in our people, and despite the fact that the troops were tired during many days of continuous and heavy fighting, the mood of Red Army soldiers, sergeants and officers was faster to move forward. These words were in the last April days of 1945 on the lips and in the heart of each of our soldiers. As a result of the rapid withdrawal of the compounds of the 125th Infantry Corps and our neighbours in the southwestern and southern directions, parallel to the western phase of the inner defensive encirclement of the Nazis managed by the end of April 24 to cut the last railroad connect capital of Nazi Germany with the west, Berlin-Rathenau, the Potsdam direction opened before us. Only 8 kilometers separated the corps units from the troops of the 1st Ukrainian Front, advancing on Teltow. The maneuver of the Soviet armies to encircle the Berlin grouping was nearing completion. Of the units of the 125th Rifle Corps took an active part in solving this important combat task, which later gave us the right to receive the name of Berlin. On the new topographic maps handed out to the commanders of formations, like a magnet, attracts the eye of a large settlement, Potsdam, a suburb of Berlin. Before the meeting at the Corps headquarters, the head of the political department, Colonel Alexei Ilyich Kolunov, who had just returned from the political department of the 47th Army, said that Potsdam, the former summer residence of the Prussian kings and German emperors, has a 1,000-year history. During this period, it has accumulated many monuments of antiquity. So the main attraction of Potsdam are the parks and palaces of Sans Souci. The best architects, sculptors, painters and gardeners worked here for many years. The halls of the palaces and art galleries were filled with paintings and sculptures of great master. All this was the property of kings and emperors, and only a select few had access to the treasury. Potsdam was surrounded on all sides by a natural wall. Lakes, canals, which covered the city from the south, west, north, and especially securely from the east, by a system of lakes. Krampnitz, Linitz, Jungfern, and the river Havel. Around the city island, not only water barriers, but also cottage suburbs with masses of stone buildings. Sepchuraz Seine consisted of several formations. Among them was the division Friedrich Ludwig Jahn, had a large stock of weapons and ammunition. Lieutenant General Telegin, a member of the Military Council of the Front, and Lieutenant General Galajev, the head of the political department. Said Alexei Ilyich, addressing the audience, asked to pass on the order of Marshal of the Soviet Union. It is necessary to seize the city so that the world-famous historical treasures remained intact. Bearing in mind this demand of the commander of the 1st Belarusian Front, we began to plan combat operations based on the current situation. By the end of the day on April 25, 1945, the enemy held the western facet of the inner defensive line of Berlin along the line of Gartenstadt, Stacken, Seeburg, Groß-Glienicke. Particularly stubborn resistance he rendered to the units of the 129th Rifle Corps on the line Gartenstadt-Span. It was clear to us that with the loss of this line, Hitlerites would lose all ammunition and food warehouses, mainly located in the western suburbs of Berlin, as well as the airfield near Kleidorf, using which they airlifted reserves and ammunition. Holding the right bank of the Havel River, the enemy controlled a bridgehead, expecting to use it to break through the grouping surrounded in Berlin to the west. The 125th Infantry Corps, with all its forces, went to the nearest approaches to Potsdam, and the neighbour on the left, the 132nd Infantry Division of the 129th Infantry Corps, by the end of the day fought on the northwestern outskirts of Gartenstadt. The remaining formations of the 129th Infantry Corps were huddled in the area northeast of Span. The gap between the combat orders of the corps, by this time reached more than 10-12 kilometres, became threatening, allowed the enemy to strike at the rear of not only the 125th Infantry Corps, but also the 47th Army. It was required immediately, without suspending the offensive on Potsdam, to defeat the enemy, holding the western facet of the inner defensive line of Berlin on the boundary of Staaken, Seeberg, Groß-Glienicke, to deprive him of all bases, the only remaining airfield in Kladow and Bridgehead on the other side of the River Havel, thereby eliminating the possibility of a breakthrough of the enemy group surrounded in Berlin to the west. Having assessed the situation at 21.0 on April 25, 1945, I made a decision to continue demonstrative actions to force the channel's River, Peretzer from the peninsula Newfoundland to Potsdam, the main preparation and forcing to make from east to west with the overcoming of Lake Jungf. For the enemy it will be a surprise. Our troops mastering the eastern outskirts of Potsdam in the area of the castle Tsetzilienhof will be able to successfully capture and the centre of the city, throwing the enemy to its outskirts under the blows of our troops advancing from the northwest and south. Such a solution seemed the simplest, and, as further events showed, in the simplicity was its strength. To the head of the armoured forces of the Corps, Lieutenant Colonel A. Edelchikov, tasked to transfer a motorised battalion of floating vehicles to force parts of the 175th Infantry Division of Lake Jungfern. The 45th year is not the 41st. Not 3 hours later, as Lieutenant Colonel Dolshikov reported that the 175th Infantry Division arrived in the 286th Motorised Battalion of Floating Vehicles, called General Vidrigan, asked which regiment he entrusted to force the Jungfern. 282nd Rifle, Mew replied. I gave the command to train properly. After all, the infantry is more accustomed to improvised means than to amphibians. Do you know, Zakhar Petrovich, how from French translates Sanssouci, the name of the park where we are to land? Vidrigan, who did not like puzzles, hummed unhappily into the telephone receiver and probably began to tweak his moustache at that moment. Sanssouci, I came to his rescue, means no worries. Well, yes, the general's bass growled indignantly. Who else has no worries but us? The commander of the 175th really had enough worries. Units of the 282nd Rifle Regiment practiced landing, exit, and forcing Lake Jungfern on amphibious vehicles. Particular attention was paid to the clarification of combat operations on the opposite shore of the lake. Caught on the shore, do not stop. To develop a rapid attack. The throw of each squad, calculation, platoon, company should be realized. Each unit of the first echelon on the terrain are given landmarks: castle, palace, Katkasilienhof, garrison, church. Unit commanders together with artillerymen and specialists of engineer-sapper service. Thoroughly on individual elements practiced interaction on the boundaries, targets and time. Each target was comprehensively studied. The artillerymen sought every opportunity to exclude targets of historical value from the firing zone. Ammunition was brought in advance. All troop movements, their concentration were carefully camouflaged. In the area of the demonstrative forcing of the canal on the peninsula Newfoundland, in the direction of Ned's, in the afternoon of April 26, and on the night of April 27, was made with relative camouflage, enhanced preparation of parts of the 16th Infantry Division for combat operations in the direction of Potsdam. In the offensive line of the 60th Infantry Division, the enemy was defending on a previously prepared line, the northwestern outskirts of Groß-Glienicke, providing our troops with strong fire resistance. The main forces of the Potsdam garrison of Hitlerites, as a result of active, brave and decisive actions of our neighbours, were concentrated on covering the outskirts, the suburbs of Potsdam from the south, west and north. In these directions there were heavy battles. Our neighbours advancing on Potsdam from the northwest, the 328th Infantry Division of Colonel I.G. Pavlovsky, and parts of the 9th Guards Tank Corps Major General of Tank Forces N.D. Vedeniv, their neighbours, advancing on Potsdam from the northwest. The 328th Infantry Division of Colonel I.G. Pavlovsky and parts of the 9th Guards Tank Corps of Major General of Tank Forces D. Deniyev. Their active actions bound the enemy in the area of Grub-Bornitz. From the south, from the area of Teltow to Potsdam, moved Guards Tank Brigade. Our chosen site for forcing Lake Jungfern was 500–600 meters north of Zetzilienhof. The palace stands on the shore of the lake, surrounded by a picturesque park. It was built at the beginning of the century for the German Crown Prince Wilhelm and his wife Katersilia. The palace, built in the style of an English manor house, was named after her. It is guarded only by patrolling outfits. The enemy, all his attention was focused on Newfoundland, where we conducted an intensified demonstrative preparation for forcing the Channel Zakrover, connecting Lakes Farland and Scharnitz. Would our daring and impetuous strike across the lake succeed in broad daylight? This question, as they say, would have hung in the air if we had not had a sober calculation and knowledge of the people who were entrusted to carry out the planned operation. It was not by chance that Major General Vidrigan chose for its implementation commander of the 282nd Sverdlovsk-Warshawski Order of Kutuzov Regiment Lieutenant Colonel Nikolai Seliverstovich Lazebnikov. Lazebnikov was one of those commanders who grew up with the Red Army in the flames of the fierce battles of the Great Patriotic War. He perfectly commanded a rifle battalion, proved himself a competent chief of staff of the regiment, and here's what is characteristic. There was in all his military affairs this surprise able to stun the enemy. Let's remember the actions of his regiment as a tank landing on April 21. Having received full autonomy, Lieutenant Colonel Lazebnikov took full responsibility for the performance of the combat task on himself, showing the inordinate qualities of an organizer of all-arms combat, high organizational skills of the commander, his confidence as if by itself transferred to all the personnel of the regiment, acting in a difficult situation clearly and coherently. It was these qualities that allowed our soldiers to demoralize the rear and control of the enemy troops in the direction of Brno by a blow to the flank and rear, and in general the daring raid of the tank landing force played a decisive role in the completion of the coverage of Berlin from the north and mastering the crossings of the Hohenzollern Canal in the area of Genningsdorf. And now Lieutenant Colonel Lazebnikov's regiment is again on the direction of the main strike of the division and corps. At 6 a.m., on April 27, 1945, having dropped camouflage nets, the 123rd Separate Fighter Anti-Tank Division and cannon divisions of the 373rd Artillery Regiment of the 175th Infantry Division at a gallop took the previously prepared firing positions on the bank of the Jungfern. By direct fire and powerful fire attacks of howitzer and mortar batteries, they suppressed the detected enemy firing points and blinded his observation posts. At 7.0, the head battalion of the 282nd Rifle Regiment, planted by combat order on floating amphibious vehicles, with the beginning of the artillery preparation without losses overcame the lake surface. On the opposite shore, deployed in combat formation, assault companies repulsed separate groups of the enemy. Without stopping at the captured bridgehead, our infantrymen rushed forward. Quickness, determination of the 1st Echelon, which captured the bridgehead, allowed the rest of the units of the 282nd Rifle Regiment, and then the 277th Rifle Regiment almost without losses, with strong fire support of the artillery of the division to force the lake. Happy is the commander watching how his subordinate troops without errors perform a single process: fire, forcing the water barrier, attack, maneuver on the bridgehead. At 3 a.m., the general offensive on Potsdam began. On the right was the 277th Rifle Regiment of Major Gennady Abramovich Vodovozov. On the left, the 282nd Rifle Regiment of Lieutenant Colonel Nikolai Seliverstovich Lazebnikov. Our units, supported by guns directly accompanying infantry, were advancing strictly to the south and soon separated the northwestern and southeastern groups of the enemy. Without getting involved in battles for individual mansions, villas of high-ranking family nobility of Prussian kings and emperors of Germany, through separate sections of the park, rifle companies with guns directly accompanying infantry, reinforced by literally crashed into the city centre, fought in the streets and squares, and captured the Marble Palace, the castle of the Hohenzollern dynasty, the former German Emperor Wilhelm II, where his son August Hohenzollern lived until the end of March 1945. Parts of the 175th Infantry Division, having repulsed the enemy, took possession of the area of the Sanssouci Palace, the garrison church. The blow of this compound was so rapid and unexpected for the enemy that by noon the command of the German troops of the Potsdam garrison lost control of their northwestern and southeastern groups, and they in confusion began to roll back from the centre of the city to the west and southeast. In the area of Nedlitz, units of the 277th Rifle Regiment, in cooperation with the 33rd Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade of the 9th Guards Tank Corps, completely destroyed the northern grouping of enemy troops. Southern group was pushed back in two directions, southwest in the direction of Gelto and southeast to the area of crossings to the island of Wannsee. By 13.0 on April 27, 1945, the 175th Infantry Division took possession of the central, northern and southern parts of Potsdam in cooperation with units of the 9th Guards Tank Corps. An hour earlier at the CP Corps called Major General Weidrigen, he reported that representatives of the Potsdam magistrate arrived with the keys to the Imperial Palace, asking to receive them. "Behind you stop, Comrade Lieutenant General," the commander added cheerfully. "Take the keys yourself," I ordered. "You, Zakhar Petrovich, are our main birthday boy." Then there was a memorable scene in the Imperial Palace, which is described in the beginning of the book. After the ceremony of handing over the keys, together with the representatives of the magistrate, we left the palace. As if on purpose, a column of captured German soldiers and officers was passing by in the last parade. On the palace square in the crowd of locals, a young German woman sobbed. Zakhar Petrovich, unhappily twirling Budenov's mustache, ordered the interpreter to find out what was the matter. Two elderly women came forward, interrupting each other, began to explain. In the column of prisoners of war is the fiancé of a young German. She is crying because she will never see him again. The general ordered to stop the column and find the bridegroom. Out of the ranks came a very young soldier who was quite shabby. Calling the girl, Zakhar Petrovich joined hands with the young people and wished them happiness. Amazed captive soldiers began to murmur, excitedly wiped tears local residents. Bowing to the Russian general, one of the women said, "We will never forget this moment. Allow us to go around the neighborhoods of the city, where the Germans are still resisting. I and the other women will tell them that the Russians are not like Goebbels said they were." About an hour later, the women returned. They reported, "The Hitler colonel is ready to end the resistance, relying on the mercy of the Russian general with the long mustache." The central quarter of Potsdam was decorated with white cloths. Colonel A.Z. Verin, deputy commander of the 175th Rifle Division, appointed the first Soviet commandant of the city, went there with a group of machine gunners. After the Great Patriotic War, I had some time to continue my service in the group of Soviet forces in Germany. Naturally, I never missed a chance to visit the places where my fellow soldiers fought and defeated the enemy. More than once I visited Potsdam, located in the neighborhood of the capital of the GDR, which went down in history as a place where the conference of the anti-Hitler coalition participants was held. In the summer of 1945, here in the Palace Zetzilienhof, statesmen of the USES, the United States and England discussed important problems related to the end of the war and subsequent development. On August 2, they signed the Potsdam Agreement, which, while reaffirming the need to eliminate Nazism and German militarism, opened the way for the construction of a peace-loving, democratic Germany. Now the Zetzilienhof Palace has been turned into a memorial museum. The working rooms of the three delegations and the large conference hall remain intact. They are preserved here as they were in July and August 1945. In the conference hall there is a large round table, specially delivered from Moscow for the conference. It was at this table that the solemn ceremony of signing the Potsdam Agreement took place. In the neighboring rooms, visitors can see an interesting exhibition showing how the democratic principles of the Potsdam Agreement were implemented in the GDR. Today's Potsdam is a large modern city, the 10th largest in the German Democratic Republic, famous for its ancient monuments. For almost a 1,000-year history of the city, they have accumulated a lot of them. The parks and gardens, spread over 290 hectares, are very nice indeed. Quiet, shady alleys and spacious sunny lawns, beautiful fountains and pools with goldfish, canals where white swans slowly swim by, fanciful grottos and pavilions, temples and palaces, and a striking abundance of sculptures. All this gives Sans Souci an extraordinary originality and poetry. Suffice it to say that only around the new palace there are 292 large sandstone sculptures representing heroes of ancient myths. 192 sculptural figures decorate the palace itself. The owners of the palaces and parks made sure that not only the parks, but also their surroundings were picturesque. It was for this purpose that the old mill that once operated in the neighbourhood of the royal estates was preserved. To make the view from the balcony of the old palace more exquisite, artificial antique ruins were built on top of the high hill in front of the balcony. The halls of the palaces and art galleries, now museums, were filled with paintings and sculptures by the masters of the time. For many years, all these riches remained the property of the royal family and were available only to representatives of the ruling elite. Beating in agony Hitlerites, who planned in April 1945 another barbarity, the destruction of the treasury, created by the labour and talent of the German people, failed to fulfill their sinister plan. The courage, self-sacrifice of Soviet soldiers made it possible to preserve national values for all mankind. At the end of April 1945, Senior Lieutenant Evgeny Fedorovich Ludshavet was appointed military commandant of the memorial complex. Having assembled a team of lightly wounded and convalescing Red Army soldiers, the war was still going on, and every soldier was precious at the front. He managed not only to preserve, but also to start repairing the cultural values damaged by the fighting. Hundreds of thousands of GDR citizens and tourists from various countries of the world now annually visit the palaces and parks of Sans Souci, which have become a national treasure. They admire the skill of architects, builders, sculptors, artists, and gardeners who have survived the centuries to create a unique ensemble of parks and palaces. Leaving the park, each visitor reads with a special feeling the inscription on the memorial plaque at the exit, which I mentioned at the beginning in my memoirs. Thanks to the valor of the Soviet soldiers, the palaces and parks of Sans Souci have been preserved for the people of our country and visitors from all over the world. By the end of the day, on April 25, 1945, the 47th Army with the 9th Guards Tank Corps had completed a complex maneuver to cover Berlin from the north and west. Taking into account the successful advance of the army, the commander of the 1st Belarusian Front Marshal of the Soviet Union, G.K. Zhukov, ordered, fulfilling the previously assigned task, to move forward units to the line Berge, Grosbenitz, Pevazin, Sokhov, for the successful solution of the task of defeating the enemy, surrounded in Berlin. It was important to dislodge his units from the right bank of the Havel from the boundaries of Spandau, Potsdam, in order to exclude the breakthrough of the rest of the troops of the Berlin garrison through the Havel under the cover of their units on the right bank of the river. After regrouping, the 125th Infantry Corps resumed the offensive to break through the western facet of the inner defensive Berlin encirclement, with fighting advanced along the shore of Lake Zagroversy, and events were developing rapidly. General jubilation swept the soldiers and commanders when the troops learned that at noon northwest of Potsdam, in the area of Ketzin, there was a connection of the 2nd Guards Tank Army and our 47th Army of the 1st Belarusian Front with the 4th Tank Army of the 1st Ukrainian Front. The Soviet troops had encircled Berlin. On the one hand, not to give the opportunity to break through to the besieged Berlin army of General Wenck, which as the last saviour called for help Hitler. On the other hand, to completely block the besieged Berlin garrison for the final defeat. The events of the last days of the war are scheduled by military historians by hours and minutes. It is possible to tell in the same sequence about the combat actions of the 125th Rifle Corps. To the share of its soldiers and commanders fell the most honourable task to fight on the hottest frontiers of the final stage of the Great Patriotic War. In the book The Last Assault, prepared by the Institute of Military History of the Ministry of Defence of the USSR, there is such an assessment of the actions of our corps. The most important result of the fighting on April 26 was the dismemberment of the entire encircled grouping in the Berlin area into two isolated parts, a large one surrounded in the city itself, and a smaller one surrounded in the area of Wannsee Island, Potsdam. This isolation was achieved as a result of the 125th Rifle Corps to the River Havel from the west in the area of Gatov, and the 7th Guards Tank Corps to this river from the east in the area west of Heerstrasse. These battles were forever imprinted in my memory by their special, seemingly senseless fierceness. The leaden blizzard of the war that continued to rage on the threshold of the great victory tore our comrades in arms out of our ranks, and the bitterness of their loss in the midst of the lush spring, when the green leaves burst to the sun even on the ashes, will remain forever. And our corps lost 2 heroes of the Soviet Union almost simultaneously. My Deputy Major General Ivan Vasilievich Davidov and the Artillery Commander Colonel Nikolai Alexandrovich Mike. During the Civil War, they, ordinary fighters of the revolution, became communists, forever linked their fate with the Red Army, honestly, to the last beat of their hearts, fulfilled their soldierly duty to the motherland. New fighters took the place of the fallen communist heroes. Many of them still have party tickets next to their hearts, wherein the line time of joining the party date, April 1945. Only for this month, the head of the political department of the 175th Rifle Division, Lieutenant Colonel C.V. Borchkov, personally handed 60 party tickets and candidate cards to soldiers and commanders. The best of the best found their place in the ranks of the party of Lenin in the days of the battle for Berlin. After one of the battles, I had the opportunity to visit the party meeting in the 373rd Artillery Regiment. The matter of accepting Nikolai Maximovich Kalotilin, a candidate for membership in the All-Union Communist Party of People's Party, was heard. Speakers spoke very briefly. "Everyone remembers yesterday," said the Chief of Communications Division Captain Petrenko. "The gunners had to work hard under continuous artillery and mortar fire. Communication worked reliably. Wire Kalotilin under enemy fire eliminated 54 wire breaks. 54. We have Kalotilin in the division, knows everyone. And no wonder, he's been in the regiment since December 1942. The awards speak about how he fought. The Order of Glory of the II degree, medals for bravery, for combat merits, for new combat deeds presented to the Order of Glory II degree. I believe Kalotilin will be a worthy communist," summed up the Chief of Staff of the division, Captain Gerasimov. When the Communists unanimously voted in favor of accepting Sergeant Kalotilin as a candidate for membership in the All-Union Communist Party of the People's Commissariat of Communism, I asked, "Why have you not joined the party before? Nikolai Maximovich, after all, you have been fighting for a long time and well. Your awards speak about it." Awards did not appear at once. Said the lieutenant embarrassedly. "Our party commander, Lieutenant Shemzukov, gave me a thought about party membership a long time ago, but I thought it was too early, and now our division is in the heat of the moment. So I think it's time." That's how steel hardens, in the thick of it. In these days, from the testimonies of Hitler's prisoners, which the Army Scouts supplied the Corps headquarters with in abundance, the picture of political and moral decomposition of the enemy troops became more and more clear, like spring snow. The last hopes of Hitlerites for salvation, for new weapons promised as a panacea from defeat by the rulers of the Third Reich, were melting away. After the war, I learned that on April 27, General Krebs, at a meeting with Hitler, was forced to admit that there is no news from the army of Wenck, and the situation in Berlin is critical. The soldiers of our corps also made a lot of effort to create this situation. In the area of the airfield in Gatow, converging blow of the 60th and 76th Infantry Division managed to encircle a large group of the enemy. Our troops also contributed to blocking the garrison of the city of Spandau. So sensible people in Germany, the pointlessness of further armed struggle was becoming increasingly clear. As I have already said, every day Hitler's army was decaying more and more. Desertion became mass. Discipline and, consequently, the management of troops fell sharply. Long columns of prisoners of war appeared on the roads leading to our rear. When it comes to prisoners of war, I always remember a curious case that happened to the chief of the topographical service of the corps, Major L.K. Rojdestemsky. On the night of April 29, I ordered him in the area of encirclement of the enemy grouping at the airfield in Gatov to clarify the true position of our forward units in the 60th Infantry Division. Major went to the front line accompanied by a machine gunner and, as they say, disappeared into the water. By morning, the corps headquarters became worried. They started calling the 60th Rifle Division, but no one there had seen our major and no one knew anything about him. At dawn, I was raised out of bed by an alarming call from the division commander, Colonel G.S. Salvation. To my forward observation post follows a car with a white flag, reported the colonel. Clearly see the Soviet and German officers in it. Where would our officer in Gatova? I pondered. ordered not to open fire. The car to let in the fighting order of the division. After a while again called Ivanov, said he was passing the phone to the parliamentarian. Saying Major Roshdestensky reports. Came the voice of the missing corps topographer. All night negotiated with the German command, Comrade Lieutenant General. A group of officers headed by the general and 2,000 soldiers with them have agreed to surrender. The whole garrison? I asked incredulously. That's right. The entire garrison of the town and the airfield. Weapons have already laid down. They are lined up in column, waiting for your instructions. Set the station as stars. If they are already lined up, let them wait. Put Ivanov on the phone. I'll give him orders to meet and escort them to our rear. What happened? At night, Roshdestensky on the front line of the 60th Rifle Division came across a large group of enemy scouts and was surrounded by them. The major was not confused. In excellent German, he imperiously ordered to escort him, a Red Army parliamentarian, to the head of the garrison. Having started a forced performance, Roshdestensky played it masterfully to the end. Hitlerites were conquered by his firmness and ultimatum from the Red Army command demanding unconditional surrender. To be fair, it should be said that our propagandists had already done a very good job on the decomposition of the garrison with the help of loudspeaker installations. In addition, the same night, the head of the political department of the 76th Rifle Division, Lieutenant Colonel Dolgopolov, sent to the commandant of the encircled garrison a group of German soldiers with an offer to surrender as prisoners. Therefore, the appearance in the camp of the enemy as a parliamentarian officer of the Corps headquarters in all respects looked logical for the sometimes overly rational Germans. No less curious than the beginning was the ending of this story for the chief of the topographical service. I ordered that Major Roshdestensky urgently come to me. In the headquarters knocked down, but he again as in the water vanished. Someone even joke. He must have gone to another garrison to disarm. I called the head of the special division. I have him, Comrade Lieutenant General. The colonel reassured me. He testifies how he was taken prisoner by the Germans. Send the major to headquarters immediately. I said, not knowing whether to laugh or be angry. Well, think about it, what kind of criminal he is. If such a case, how many of our people saved from death? That garrison could not be taken with bare hands. They could have resisted to the last man. I prepared the Order of the Red Star for him. But what about you? Operation Spandau Citadel, conducted by a group of political workers of the political department of the 47th Army, headed by Colonel MDOX Kalashnik, was successfully completed. How they managed to induce the garrison to voluntarily surrender to our troops is described in detail in the book by Mikhail Karatonovich, Trial by Fire. I remember the words of a former soldier quoted in it. There is no calculation to go under bullets because of some 100 of frenzied fascists. The war will soon be over. I want to go home with victory. If I'm ordered to storm this very fortress, I won't leave the others behind. But, where possible, it's better to settle things peacefully. Such reasoning was dictated by sober calculation, which guided the command refusing to storm the fortress. Operation Citadel Spandau was the longest in terms of time, from April 27 to May 1, 1945, thanks to the thoughtfulness, specificity, persuasiveness and flexibility in the application of forms and methods of work. The garrison of Spandau Fortress capitulated at 15.0 on May 1, 1945. Unfortunately, not always Hitlerites put up with the inevitability of surrender. As we now know, on April 28, General Weidling reported to Hitler that the troops will be able to hold out no more than 2 days because they will be left without ammunition and food, and proposed to carry out a breakthrough from the encirclement along the Anderheerstrasse south of Wilhelmstadt to the west by 3 echelons. In the first echelon, reinforced by tanks, assault guns and artillery, the 9th Parachute Division with its subordinate battle group Ida, and parts of the 18th Motorized Division. The second echelon is the SS Monk Combat Group, consisting of 2 regiments and a battalion of Marines, with the second echelon should break through and Hitler's bet. The third echelon, the remnants of the Tank Division Muncheberg, the battle group Berenfenger, the remnants of the 11th Motorized Division of the SS Nordland, and part of the forces of the 9th Parachute Division. General Weidling in his testimony later wrote, "The Führer pondered for a long time. He regarded the general situation as hopeless. This was clear from his long reasoning, the content of which can be summarized as follows. If the breakthrough even in fact will be successful, we just fall from one cauldron in another. He, the Führer, would then have to huddle in the open air, or in a peasant's house, or something similar, and wait for the end. It would be better for him to remain in the imperial chancellery. Thus, the Führer rejected the idea of a breakthrough. However, this thought was not rejected by Hitler's successors after his death. Having begun negotiations with the Soviet command on surrender, they were simultaneously actively preparing a breakthrough in the direction of Strzezo, Wilhelmstadt, and further west to our allies, who at this time were advancing without meeting any resistance. On the right bank of the Havel River in the direction of Strzezo, Ruhleben Westend, the enemy held a narrow corridor connecting it with the main Berlin grouping. On April 28, 1945, the encircled grouping in the area of Westend was strengthened by the enemy units, withdrawn under the blows of the 2nd Guards Tank Army from Charlottenburg, as well as by the grouping encircled in the area of Strzezo. Its strength reaches more than 20,000 men with pikes and assault guns. By blows from the east and west, it pushed back the units of the 56th Panzer Brigade to the line of Heerstrasse Station, Pichelsburg Station. Thus, the Nazis got a free exit to the bank of Havel. Once again, troops of the 125th Rifle Corps were in the center of events. They were assigned the task to complete the destruction of disparate groups of the enemy southwest of Potsdam, in the area of Helto, to eliminate the group of the enemy in Pichelsdorf. In these battles, our old friends from the 334th Guards Heavy Self-Propelled Regiment again strongly helped the infantrymen. In Pichelsdorf, Hitlerites strengthened in big stone houses. They fired from windows and attics with false patrons. The self-propelled vehicles slowly moved along the central streets of the city. They are narrow and darkish. Suddenly there was a deafening thump of a false patron. The commander's vehicle shook sharply. In the side of the self-propelled vehicle ripped out a large piece of metal. Mechanic driver sharply turned the car around the corner of the house. Another shot, and the cartridge crashed into the wall of the opposite house. Automaticians jumped off the cars, surrounded the house, and in a short battle destroyed a group of Verstniki. That's how I saw from my observation point the joint actions of infantrymen and self-propelled gunners. And here appeared an old acquaintance, the commander of the regiment, Guards Lieutenant Colonel Fyodor Geraschenko. He began to ask me with surprise why today. On May 1, by order of the commander, the regiment again goes to Berlin on the same places where it had attacked the day before. Somehow it turns out inconvenient, Comrade General. We are rumbling back, said Geraschenko. This is a front with inverted flanks, or, as they used to say at the exercises, a multi-layered pie. I concretized the task to the self-propelled gunners and in farewell warned. Look, guardsmen, don't fail. Marshal Zhukov is watching the operation. Do not want to surrender to Hitler's coddlers, who remained in the surrounded Berlin. They are rushing to the west. We will long remember this May Day, wiping sweaty forehead with the back of his palm, said Geraschenko. And they said the Krauts capitulated. On May 2, 1945, the garrison of Berlin capitulated. But Hitlerites in their dying hours made one more attempt to escape retribution. At dawn on May 2, 1945, on the defense of the right flank units of the 132nd Infantry Division and left flank units of the 76th Infantry Division, two strong groups of the enemy struck. The first numbering more than 17,000 men with tanks and self-propelled guns, using the highway bridge over the River Havel and a bridgehead on the left bank of the river in the area northeast of Pichelsdorf. After a short but powerful artillery preparation broke through the junction of the 216th Infantry Regiment of the 76th Infantry Division and the 712th Infantry Regiment of the 132nd Infantry Division. Having wedged into our stretched defense front, the Nazis moved southwest toward Seeberg. This group consisted up to 300 prominent fascist functionaries. The second group, numbering up to 30,000 soldiers and officers with tanks and assault guns, from the morning of May 2, 1945, broke through in the area of the railway bridge, south of the island part of Spandau, and cut into the defense of the 498th and 605th Rifle Regiments of the 132nd Rifle Division, having the task to reach the areas of Falkensee, Lager Deberitz, and subsequently break through to the LB. Occupying the defense on a wide front, the 132nd and 76th Infantry Divisions, separated by Hitlerite units, which had cut into their combat orders, fought hard with the enemy grouping, acted independently, bravely and decisively, striving to destroy the enemy's manpower and equipment. I would like to tell briefly about how bravely our people fought with 40,000 group of Hitlerites who tried to break through from Berlin on May 2, 1945, south of Spandau, when after the artillery preparation the German troops, with a huge avalanche with tanks in front, moved to the breakthrough. Our crews of self-propelled artillery units and infantry did not tremble, but, lying low, waited for the command to open fire. No more than a kilometre, 800, 700, 600 metres, already clearly distinguishable cars, guns, soldiers and officers. Lieutenant A. Startov, a Leningrad resident, was the first to open fire on the lead tank, followed by other saw guns. The head tank stood up. Starshov commands. Another shell. More. The crews of Lieutenants Orlov, Soblyakov, Gremov and others entered the battle. The German tank Tiger, on which the Nazis had once pinned so much hope, burst into flames and exploded with such force that everything around shook. The German infantry is scattering. Fighting is transferred to the forests and bushes and continues until night, and under the cover of darkness fascists again rush from the capital to the west. On foot, on cars and trucks, they filled the roads near Berlin. In the darkness it is difficult to distinguish between their own and strangers. Therefore, our command set up light signals to indicate their vehicles, armoured personnel carriers and tanks. The subordinates of Guards Lieutenant Colonel Goroshchenko acted well, having received the task to saddle the roads. Here comes a passenger car without lights. Guards Lieutenant Ivan Bokharov observes it in the open hatch of the self-propelled vehicle, gives the established in these days the signal with rockets. The driver of the car does not react to the signal, increases speed. The lieutenant repeats the signal, the car rushes on. Then he orders to send a 122mm shell after it, which literally turns the car around. It turns out that Nazi officers were riding in it. Guards lieutenant in these battles hit 2 tanks and 2 guns. In the regiment loved cheerful 20-year-old Lieutenant Ivan Bokharov, and his officer friends called him simply Vanya. He won this love by his military deeds. I remembered the forest edge near the Vistula, illuminated by the slanting rays of the setting sun. The regiment was camping. In the smoke of the camp kitchens was smelling. Noisy conversations and laughter could be heard. In the depths of the forest a harmonica was singing merrily. On the flat turret of the self-propelled vehicle a young lieutenant with bright blue eyes was tap-dancing with his heels. Who is it? The soldiers wondered. A small-sized sergeant in a tank helmet and oiled turtleneck answered. The new commander of the self-propelled unit. What a dancer! We've never seen such a one. They say he's an artist. An artist is an artist, but how will he lead the self-propelled vehicle into battle? I heard someone's voice behind me. Some time passed. In the winter of 1945, the regiment fought for several days in Poland for the liberation of the town of Schneidermühl. The advance of our infantry was hindered by a German armoured self-propelled artillery units, covered by bushes, stood in ambush at night. When the armoured train was advancing along the railroad line, our self-propelled guns suddenly struck from 122mm cannons. The armoured train was burned. I was told that in this battle the crew under the command of Ivan Alexeyevich Bokharov distinguished themselves. And in the Berlin operation the lieutenant showed courage and bravery more than once. For his military exploits Bokharov was awarded 3 battle orders and many medals. Before the war he graduated from the Shibuksari Theatre School. He worked in the theatre. At the front this man of purely peaceful specialty became a fearless warrior. The great patriotic war Bokharov began as a Red Army soldier, finished as an officer. After the war he returned to his favourite work, worked as an... From the morning of May 2 the battle was going on, continuously for a whole day. During the second half of the day, on May 2, 1945, and on the night of May 3, parts of the 132nd Infantry Division in cooperation with the 93rd Infantry Regiment of the 76th Infantry Division, bypassing from the north and southwest cut off the German group of breakthrough routes in the northwest direction to Falchen. Greatly acted in these battles artillery. In the evening of May 2, I visited the 80th Artillery Red Banner Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Spiridon Dmitrievich Postolako. Fighting with the Hitlerites rolling wave after wave, the battery men stood to the death at Pischelsdorf. At the cost of their own heavy losses, they did not let the enemy through. About the greatest courage and steadfast of the artillerymen speaks such a fact. Only for one day of fighting, May 2, Lieutenant Colonel Postolaco presented 66 Red Army soldiers and officers for awarding orders and medals, as well as subordinates of Lieutenant Colonel Postolaco. Artillerists of the 100th Separate Fighter Anti-Tank Division of the 76th Rifle Division, under command of Major Nikolai Vasilievich Termilov, who occupied firing positions in the area of Steichen, fought heroically with maddened Hitlerites. Their last adventure cost the Hitlerites dearly. For May 2 and 3, 1945, only in the strip of the 132nd Infantry Division, they lost more than 2,000 soldiers and officers killed and wounded, 2387 prisoners. In addition, 650 soldiers, disguised in civilian uniforms, and mostly officers, were taken prisoner. Corps units destroyed and hits. Tanks, 15 self-propelled guns, 12 armoured personnel carriers, 35 anti-aircraft guns, 5 cars, 100. So the last attempt of fascists to escape to the west from the Berlin cauldron ended ignominiously. Hitlerites did not want to lay down arms in the centre of Berlin. They laid down on its outskirts. By the end of May 8, 1945, on the right bank of the Elbe northeast of Magdeburg, the compounds of the 125th Rifle Corps held the last battle, having thrown the resisting groups of Hitlerites into the river. There was nowhere to go further. On the left bank of the river stood the Americans, our allies. They took the unkilled Hitlerites. When approaching our units, the Americans fired a series of rockets into the sky. Ours also responded with conditional signals. Rockets have always served as a signal to attack, now became a signal for peace. Suddenly there was silence over the Elbe. The thunder of the guns was silenced, but none of us could not yet believe in all that had already been accomplished. For the 125th Rifle Corps, the war was over. Not a single Hitlerite remained between us and the Allies. Only the silent Elbe carried its dark waters. Each of these unforgettable historical days and hours brought new and new news. The Soviet radio broadcast reports about the ongoing battles on the Ukrainian fronts, and foreign radio stations all day on May 7 and all day on May 8, 1945 spoke about the surrender of Germany. Moscow spoke about it only when the act of unconditional surrender of the German armed forces was signed. May 1945 brought us the greatest joy, victory. But there were other pleasant messages. By the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR on May 28, 1945, among the formations that distinguished themselves in the Pomeranian operation, the Corps was awarded the Order of Kutuzov VE degree. The final battles with the Nazis brought him the honourable name of Berlin. At regimental and divisional rallies, the battle banners, covered with ribbons of the order, were blazing. The faces of remarkable and unique people, my frontline brothers, shone with great happiness and joy. They stood, reached and won. In the holy moments of the great victory, each of its soldiers, whether he was a private or a general, thought about the motherland. She called for a feat, and we did it. In those first minutes of not front, but peaceful calm, I suddenly clearly realized that we will soon return to the motherland. And our Russian side appeared so clearly to me that I, already a young, experienced soldier, got a lump in my throat. I saw in my mind the Smolensk village where I spent my childhood, whispering birches under the window of my grandfather's old house. I imagined clear, dewy dawns and purple sunsets, meadows and the smell of mint, even the taste of cold water that I used to draw with my palms from the spring, felt on my lips. And every little thing I remembered was unusually dear and sweet to me. I like our young people. I like that they reach out to us veterans. They want to know a lot about the soldiers of the great victory, what they were like, what they dreamed of, what songs they sang, where they drew their strength and faith from in the most difficult days of the battles and campaigns. I have long pondered how I should finish the book. I wanted it to be words about my friends, their fates and our heirs, who have the great happiness to carry the baton of labour, struggle and victories of the Soviet people into the future. I have already told about the work of the Club Search of the Moscow Trade and Economic College. For many years, the Pathfinders have been following the road of national feat, long and painstakingly search for combat awards not handed for various reasons to the frontline soldiers. About the last New Year's Eve party dedicated to the 40th anniversary of the Battle of Moscow, where I presented orders to fellow soldiers, told Pravda in the Material D, Novoplansky, much and well written about the frontline soldiers. I thought that I could not think of a better epilogue. New Year's Eve party was held on Leninsky Prospect, in the House of Culture of the Institute of Steel and Alloys. here in the neighborhood was formed in 1941, the 1st Division of the People's Militia of the Lenin district of Moscow. It began its combat journey near Serpukhov, and then became the 60th Rifle Division of the Sevsko-Varshavskaya Red Banner, Order of Suvorov. And this traditional meeting was held by the Veterans Council of this division together with Komsomol trekkers. Young men and women met the frontline soldiers with music and flowers. On the stage invited the former commander of the gun Stanislav Korneyevich Sadovnikov. In the battles he was twice wounded, lost his right arm. Now Sadovnikov works in the Belarusian city of Zlobin, in the locomotive depot, where before the war he was an assistant driver, and after the war, Kaler of brigades, watchman. His wife works in the same depot. His youngest son is studying at a military school. The old soldier, a war invalid, was awarded the Order of the Red Banner, which he was awarded in February 45th year. Immediately 2 orders, Patriotic War I degree and the Red Star, were then awarded to Nikita Vasilievich Sadamov, formerly a soldier of the 57th Guards Cav Polk. More than 20 inquiries were sent by pathfinders to Ryazan and Penza regions, looking for Nikita Vasilievich. They managed to find out that he was born in the village of Alexievka, Penza region. We found his relatives. They reported that for more than 30 years, the honored warrior worked as a carpenter on the capital's construction sites. 2 front awards also received the former commander of department Ivan Pavlovich Lunin, mechanic of Serpukhov motorcycle factory. At the walls of his native city he fought in December of the 41st. In the Moscow region he was seriously wounded and did not know that he was awarded the Medal for Bravery. After returning to the line, again difficult fights, again wounded, and when the order about rewarding with the Order of the Patriotic War of I degree came out, Ivan Pavlovich was in hospital. Together with him, the Medal for is received, and the former scout of the 1,283rd Regiment Fyodor Semenovich Ryabchenko, on the document on his awarding stamped deceased. The soldier was severely wounded in the head, but survived. Pathfinders found Ryabchenko in Chernigov BU. With special attention, listened to the story about the fate of the former battalion commander of the 1,281st Rifle Regiment, Georgy Efimvich Ogorodnikov. In the spring of the 44th near Kovel, he and a tank landing party broke into the enemy positions. In a cruel battle, our paratroopers inflicted great damage to the enemy, but the tank where Ogorodnikov was, Hitlerites hit and set on fire. The commander continued to fire from the burning tank, and the news of his heroic death spread throughout the regiment. Order of Patriotic War of the I degree Ogorodnikov was awarded posthumously. Relatives received a funeral. Pathfinders began to look for his family to present them with this award. But from the village of Syshevki, Smolensk district, Altai region, Georgy Efimovich himself responded. He remembers how he jumped out of the tank in a burning overcoat, how he rushed into hand-to-hand combat. After heavy wounds, he woke up in the hospital. For a long time, speech, hearing, and memory did not return, but he survived, recovered, and worked as a chauffeur for 23 years. Now he is retired. He did not know about the order and expressed regret that he would not be able to come to the meeting with his comrades in arms in Hors. It was decided that Ogorodnikov would be awarded the order by the District Military Enlistment Office. But as the comrades in arms remember well the brave combatant, the Council of Veterans and staff of Pathfinders planned to show Georgy Efimovich at least on the screen. The workers of the Novosibirsk studio of documentary films responded and brought the tape. The light goes out in the hall. Over the stage, where the award ceremony takes place, distant Syshevka, the house of the former commander, his wife Elena Ivanovna, still working in the state farm, Georgy Efimovich himself, hotly telling about his last battle. I was not burned, not burned. The hall applauds amicably. And then the presiding officer announces. However, Georgy Efimovich is here in the hall. Please, Georgy Efimovich. There is, it turns out, a miraculous force that can lift an old soldier from his seat, and he goes thousands of kilometers away to see those with whom he fought for the motherland, despising death. Not without the help of comrades steps to the stage tall man of about 60 years in a new suit, and he is instantly recognized. His comrade in arms rushed to him, hugged him, kissed him. The strict order is broken. Arrived from Khakassia, the former commander of the Mortar Battery 1,283rd Rifle Regiment G. Soryotin comes to the microphone and reads his poems. Live such a combatant in the world that was posthumously awarded, and he walks on the planet as if reborn. That was how this New Year's Eve evening was, where orders were awarded to the old soldiers, defenders of the motherland, who will never be forgotten. The story of Nikolai Nikiforovich Yermak, a Red Army soldier, scout of the 135th Rifle Regiment, made a deep impression on all present, young and old. Komsomol members learned about Yermak from a publication in Pravda in September of this year. The newspaper criticized the disrespectful, bureaucratic attitude to the disabled war veteran, and the Pathfinders, who worked in the card index of the decorated, decided to check whether the invalid has front awards, whether he received them, what was found out and then confirmed by the check. Shortly before the end of the war, a group of scouts, having fulfilled a combat mission, was returning to the unit. Nikolai Yermak, who was in front, ran into an enemy mine. He lost an arm and a leg and miraculously survived. The fearless scout, who distinguished himself in many battles, was awarded the Order of Patriotic War of the I degree. Only now, 36 years later, he, a resident of the village of Ratishtsy, Brest region, was awarded this award. Mikhail Savalevich Sevchenko, a former platoon commander of the 261st Guards Rifle Regiment, a worker of the Uglegorsk commercial seaport in the Sakhalin region, came from the other side of the country to attend the festive evening. He was solemnly awarded the Order of the Patriotic War of the II degree. The Order of the Red Star was awarded to Konstantin Konstantinovich Konov, a former battalion commissar, now an oil engineer, Ivan Mikhailovich Molodoik, a former squad leader, now a mechanic of a motor depot in Voronezh, Georgy Ivanovich Parshe, a former Red Army man of the anti-tank gun platoon of the 1283rd Rifle Regiment, now a repair mechanic in Commission, Volgograd region, Viktor Egorovich Titov, a former platoon commander of the 1281st Rifle Regiment, now a civil engineer. It is necessary to tell that the majority of veterans of war to whom the front awards were given are still in labor. The fate of the former machine gunner Senior Sergeant Nikolai Ivanovich Sintsov is characteristic. Soon after the war, he came to Solikamsk, entered the plant as an apprentice turner, and has been working at the same enterprise for more than 30 years. He graduated from the Polytechnic Institute, became an engineer, and now he is the chief mechanic of the plant. He was awarded the Order of Glory of I degree. The Third Order of Glory was awarded to Gavril Yakovlevich Laukin, a former fighter of a separate intelligence company. He received the Order of Glory AI and II degree in 45th, and now it turned out that in 43rd he was also awarded the Order of EI degree, Orders of the Patriotic War, which were awarded to the squad commander Ivan Ivanovich Bogdanov and platoon commander Vyacheslav Vladimirovich Ushanov, were handed over to their families. The audience warmly welcomed the activists of the club Search Natalia Shugai, Alexei Zakrevsky, Marina Muravyeva, Nelia Obedkova, Olga Karandayeva, Svetlana Smetankina, and others. They also thanked executive committees, military committees, Komsomol committees, teachers, letter carriers, all those who helped the long, difficult search. Komsomol members escorted each veteran to the train, airplanes. Pathfinders of the Moscow Technical School have already managed to specify addresses of 307 awarded frontline soldiers who have not received the orders and medals. Of them, 96 live and are well. They are being awarded, and many have already been awarded. The gala evening on New Year's Eve is a gift not only to veterans frontline soldiers of one division, it is a gift to all. It is a convincing reminder that the Soviet soldiers who defended the motherland in the most difficult of wars will never be forgotten.